Bob's Burgers is a wonderful show with a cast full of interesting, fleshed out characters that often carry episodes with their plans and hijinks. But at the center of it all is the Belcher family. Bob, Linda, Tina, Jean, and Louise have thoroughly endeared themselves to the audience over their 283 episode run, and I, for one, am invested to almost an unhealthy level in every single one of them. This is a comfort show for a lot of people, myself included, and we've been lucky enough to see these characters grow and learn over 15 seasons. But as the newest season continues on, I find myself thinking more and more about how the show will eventually end. Yes, we've seen pretty solid character development over the run of the show, but it's not like the characters have really aged. We've spent 12 Christmas episodes with Louise being 9 in order to maintain the status quo and build stories off of the same characters we know and love. So when the show eventually does end, I'd love to see a sneak peek or get an idea of what life will be like for the Belchers, even say 15 years down the line? I think at this point it's obvious, with the restaurant being such an integral part of the story, that one of the kids will take it over after Bob and Linda retire in order to continue the burger flipping legacy, but I'd like to look a little bit deeper today. There have been a few episodes among the series run that have hinted at a specific Belcher child taking control of the restaurant in the future, but I don't think it's as certain as that. In this video, I'm going to look at each of the 3 Belcher children to see how likely it is that they take over Bob's Burgers in the future, and how good they would actually be at running the restaurant. If you're like me, then you desperately want to see Bob and the family succeed, and I think it would be really great to get a sneak peek into the future and see one of the Belcher children running an incredibly successful restaurant in an effort to carry on and push the legacy forward. Alright, let's get the easy one out of the way. I really don't see Tina staying on to run the restaurant. Tina is such a creative and hardworking girl that if she did stay on, I'm sure she'd do an alright job, but she's never really shown any interest or desire to do so. She's not super into food like Jean, and she doesn't have a cunning business mind like Louise. I think if she did stay on, she'd probably care most about keeping the restaurant in the family and making sure that Bob's dream is able to continue. Tina tends to care about doing the right thing, and that's often what motivates her. However, I think if either of her siblings showed any interest in running Bob's Burgers, she'd more than likely be completely alright with letting them take over. Realistically, I think that Tina becomes either a writer who writes steamy novels for middle-aged women, or a veterinarian. As we've seen throughout the show, Tina loves writing her friend fiction, as she calls it, and almost always leans more towards the steamy side in a very humorous way. This inclination very well could be due to her going through puberty, but it's a hobby that she maintains throughout the entire series up to this point, and I think it would be really awesome if she grew up and continued making her stories with someone like Jimmy Jr. in mind, just for her to finally start getting some positive recognition for it. Alternatively, her love for horses is very frequently touched upon, and we've seen that Tina has an incredible understanding for horses and their anatomy. Her natural interest has given her a really great base to start from, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to see her continue to follow down that path and become maybe a horse doctor at some point. I think out of the two, I prefer the novelist idea, as I think it would be a really funny path for Tina to go down, but either way, I don't think she'll end up running the restaurant. Tina would certainly be involved, and I could see her coming around often and maybe working a bit here and there, helping out around the place. Alright, on to Ken's friend Jean. Here's my lukewarm take for this video. I think Jean is very, very, very likely to end up taking over the restaurant, and I'll explain why. Obviously, we know that Jean has a huge love for music. It's a really important part of his character, and even in the movie, it's really the climax for the character. Over the seasons, he's put together bands and entered song contests, and even stayed dating Courtney longer because he wanted to get closer to her musician father. But here's the thing, Jean's not actually very good at making music. We consistently see that his love and desire to push himself forward within the space is hampered by his lack of ability to actually play any instruments. Now, part of this could be because he is only 11, and there are very few people out there that make good music by that age. Or it could be the fact that the Belchers can't afford to get him lessons, but Gene's lack of ability is a very consistent aspect that we see throughout the series. He could certainly improve and teach himself to play. I'd also even say that the eventual song that he did enter the song contest with was pretty good, but that seems to be an outlier for Gene. And I don't know if he would have the dedication to teach himself one instrument, let alone a few in order to make a full-fledged song. Now, Gene also hasn't shown a particular ability for food yet either. Gene loves food and shares his interest very much with Bob, but the few times he's had the opportunity to actually make something, it hasn't gone very well. So, where does that leave us? Well, if we compare the two and say that he has a big interest in both music and food, he kinda sucks at both of them, but he has someone to teach him how to cook, whereas he doesn't have anyone to teach him how to play an instrument. I think that's the more likely path he goes down. I see Gene as the future chef of the restaurant, maybe showing more of an interest to learn once he gets to be a few years older. Bob gets really excited whenever one of his kids takes an interest in cooking or food, so I'm sure he would be ecstatic to teach Gene everything he knows, and I could definitely see Gene developing a real ability for it. Gene is the only member of the Belcher family that I could see matching Bob's interest in food. I don't know about you, but I can't see a version of Bob's Burgers that doesn't make amazing food, and I think Gene is the only one that has that same level of passion. Who knows, maybe he does find his way in music, and that does end up being the path that he goes down, but I think Gene running the restaurant fits really well, and I'd love to see them have it play out like this. And finally, we come to Louise. The most like Bob, Louise tends to have great mind for business, and she's always looking for a way that she can make an extra buck. It's been hinted at a few times that there's some understanding that Louise is likely to take over the restaurant, and I definitely think that's the way the showrunners are going to take it. I think Louise would be very good at running the business, and I think she would bring new ideas and a much better mind for marketing than Bob and Linda ever have. And even more importantly than that, like Tina, I'm sure that Louise would feel very strongly about keeping the restaurant going and keeping it in the family. And that, along with her deep connection to Bob, is what will compel her to take over and make the restaurant successful. However, Louise has never really shown an interest in food or cooking. Like Gene, the few times we have seen her cook, it hasn't gone so well. And overall, she's never shown any sort of passion for what Bob creates. So, here's my final headcanon. And this is what I desperately hope that they end up doing. As I mentioned before, I hope they make Tina a novelist who continues writing her friend fiction, just in a more mature setting. I hope that they build on Gene's love for food and make him the chef of Bob's Burgers. And I hope that they make Louise the business manager, focusing on the front end and the marketing aspect of the business. I think the duo of Gene and Louise would be really awesome to see, and I think both of those roles would play to their strengths really well. It would be really heartwarming to continue to see the restaurant being a family affair, and it brings me immense peace thinking of these characters continuing to get up to hijinks in the restaurant, even after things might change. Bob's Burgers is one of those comfort shows that will have to leave each of the characters in a good spot. When they finally do end the show, they need to end it in a way that honors the journey that each character has gone through. And I'm very confident that they'll do a fantastic job with it when the time finally comes. But until then, this is how I think everything ends up. Thank you for watching.